week's edition of the CommonSpace Show. I'm Rhiannon Davies.
And I'm David Jamieson. With us for this special edition is Dr Nick McKerrell, who's an expert in constitutional law at Glasgow Caledonian University, and Liam Stevenson, a co-founder of the Thai campaign, a campaigner, and here today straight from work, as you can see.
And we're going to begin by kicking off with a chat about what's been going on in Parliament this week. It's been a truly tumultuous week in Parliament. They often say that, but I think this week actually qualifies as tumultuous. We'll then be watching a short video from mine and David's trip to Govan today, where we spoke to people about what they thought about what was going on.
Second vote, definitely. Yeah. And at the referendum. Because we didn't even know what we were voting for last time.
It's completely hot. Just an end up everything to the EU.
And then we'll be reflecting on maybe what comes next and what's actually the reality of what's happening in Scotland right now.
So first of all, Nick, in all of your time as an expert on law, studying the British Constitution and wider constitutional politics, have you ever seen anything like this? How would you characterise the last 2 or 3 days?
Again, for everyone I think in society, not even apart from that very tiny number that study anything like the Constitution, it has been unprecedented times. The real conflict has been, from a constitutional law point of view, is that the narrative around the UK Constitution is that it's not written, so it's quite unique in the world, almost completely unique in the world, and not having a document that is the Constitution. One of the central questions in the independence referendum was about what would be in a Scottish Constitution if Scotland voted to become independent. So the UK doesn't have that, and that's been put forward as an advantage because you're flexible and it's stable and people can work together and so on, and you're not hidebound by the rules in a document. That's all been blown apart in the last few weeks, although it's been coming for quite a long time in terms of us having a UK government with Theresa May with no majority in the lawmaking body. And what was meant to be in the UK is a stable system because the lawmakers are selecting of the government the people that run the country. Other countries have a more antagonistic relationship when they separately elect the lawmakers from the rulers. Now that's all broken down, and you can see literally almost the parallel of parliaments that break up around the world in fights between MPs. That's really what you're seeing in Westminster now. Mm-hmm. The government have absolutely no influence over the lawmakers, and that's falling apart, which means all the assumptions and the underlying philosophy and ideology that underpins the UK Constitution really has been challenged.
Mm-hmm. Liam, do you have a feeling like I do of sort of a mixture of sort of twisted excitement at watching the Tory party self-cannibalise, but also just generalised confusion and anxiety about where we go from here?
Well, I wouldn't describe it as twisted excitement, it's absolute excitement. It's really, this for me has been an extraordinary time. I think there'll be lots of people with profile in the European Union will be absolutely howling up their sleeves because this was potentially the third government that's going to collapse in the process of trying to divorce the United Kingdom from the European Union, and that's really quite extraordinary. It's an extraordinary time. But I think that I'm excited to see where we go next because I'm hopeful that we're in the midst of the breakup of the British state, and I'm really, really excited to see where we move from here next.
And we certainly are seeing, I remember at the start of this crisis, people were saying, this, if there's ever going to be an issue that can conceivably split the Conservative Party, is this one. And it's just not conceivable if you've, grown up all your life seeing the Conservative Party as this utterly dominant political force. They've now kicked out, 21 MPs, lost a majority even before that, and it's totemic political figures for the Conservative Party, if not in the country, like Ken Clarke and Nicholas Soames and stuff like that. Can the Tory party coalition, that traditional coalition of sort of more hard right-wing people and more kind of liberal pragmatic people, if there is a general election, does that survive, do you think?
Well, I don't think so, and to bring it back to this whole way in which the British state operates in the Constitution, part of that idea of stability is the way that Parliament is elected, because it's first past the post, and it means that you've got to win a majority of seats. So it led to coalitions of parties so they could win seats easier. So in most European countries, you don't really have the same sort of party as the Conservative Party. The hard right are sort of more strong and organised in different political forces. Conservatives were coalesced around it. But And it's not, I mean, in the past, constitutional reformers say, well, if you have proportional representation, it'll break up the political parties. Actually, the political parties have broken up. Well, the Conservative Party in particular now has broken up because of the very static form of the state that exists just now.
We're still in a really strange place with this debate in Scotland, aren't we? Because we are kind of living in the afterglow of all the furious stuff that's going on down there. I mean, I get the impression it's much more intense in England, and obviously in places like London, than it is in Scotland. What do you think? I mean, we'll be looking at that video and talking about the kind of national political mood, but how do you think this is differently received in Scotland? Presumably, if there were a general election, the SNP would mop up. What do you think, Liam?
Yeah, I think that would certainly the poll that came out this morning would certainly indicate that. I think there's a bit of a difference with regards to the whole debate in Scotland with the relationship with the European Union, and I think that the difference is that what we're seeing right now in England is an explosion of English nationalism. That didn't seem to happen in Scotland in 2014, certainly not in my experience of being active during the referendum campaign. I didn't feel that Scottish nationalism, I didn't feel that anger. I felt, a cries for a better Scotland and a better future. And I think that right now, some of the work I do through trade union negotiation and stuff is cross-border, and I certainly find there's a real anger amongst people who work in the exact same job as me south of the border, whereas the guys up here who voted in the European Union referendum are neither up nor down. They don't really care too much. Whether that's because these people have got their eyes on another referendum that may be upcoming in the very near future, I don't know, but there certainly doesn't seem to be the same level of anger in Scotland.
I think that's it. I mean, I think as someone who grew up in England but has lived in Scotland the past 3 years, living here, you feel this kind of disconnect from what's going on down there, and I think that is because in the back of your mind there is this escape route which could open up, and so you're not as worried maybe about your country going to hell in a handcart because you've got something else that's possibly better on the horizon.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very true that distinction. And the constitutional I'll bring it back to that again, but the constitutional problem of how that actually happens with the independence referendum and so on, the SNP leadership have focused, and understandably to some extent, on getting a Section 30 order and second referendum, going through the formalities of that. But you're dealing with a state that's fallen apart, and you're trying to impose a stability on that to give you a Section 30 order, so it would be like 2014 again. But I think a second referendum, if and when it comes, it'll be quite different, because you're not dealing with quite a confident British state. It's dissolving in many ways.
That is a fascinating angle on this, isn't it? Is that the SNP, who of course their ultimate political programme is to leave the UK and to break up that state, they actually need that state to be stable up to a point to even allow independence to happen on that basis. Liam, if there's another referendum campaign, I mean, do you think there's a need for the adoption of different tactics for the achievement of independence beyond just something like a Section 30 order? Would you need something like they had in Catalonia, where there was like a degree of street pressure and stuff like that?
Well, we've got all under one banner for that, haven't we? Yeah. So there is the street pressure if they can stop tearing themselves apart. I'm not quite sure what the route towards another referendum should be, to be quite honest with you, because I've been busy watching the debacle unfolding down south. And do you know, one of the most interesting aspects for me is the fact there's been that implosion this week, because I always think that traditionally it's the left that go and fight with one another and rip each other from limb to limb, whereas the right seem to be better at galvanising themselves and coming around that, because ultimately for these people who are social elites, it's about ruling, it's about maintaining power. We've seen that with the dirty deal with the DUP. Anything has to be done to control the country and control the people, then they'll do that. But I'm not quite sure how another referendum should be played out. All I'm concerned about is playing a role in it and winning it. That's what I'm really thinking about. That's for other people to go and decide how we go about it. I'm looking for platforms and looking to try and engage with people and try and make people do the right thing and give our children a better opportunity.
A lot of questions about constitutional stability will be posed about Scotland, because what attitude, for example, should an independent Scotland have to having the monarch as head of state and the use of the royal prerogative? Because that was an abstract for many people in 2014. But in the last few weeks, we've actually seen how these things can be used by the ruling elite in Britain in a very bad negative way. These issues didn't really arise, or certainly weren't pressurised. But I think there will be questions asked about that in a way which I hope the independence movement can come up with answers for. But in many ways, it's an issue that's been shied away from. But the tensions of down south, I think, means that we do have to deal with these things.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating about how certainly when I was involved in the independence movement in 2014, there was a degree of naivety. I mean, some of it's self-imposed because you've just got an end that you're trying to achieve and there's certain questions you don't have time for and so on. But if there were another independence referendum, there are certain questions that can no longer be avoided. For example, does there need to be a second referendum to ratify an independence vote? That will clearly be a demand on one side. It's clear to people now that the division of assets, trade, a trade deal with the remaining UK state, these are all now questions. Is there such a thing as no deal Scottish independence? Can that be used against the independence movement? So a whole new body of ideas.
Who's the head of state?
Who's the head of state? Exactly. There's so many kind of spiky constitutional issues now that will be thrown around to each other.
Yeah, and we went to the streets of Glasgow to talk to some of those people.
Do you think there should be a general election? No. What do you think the outcome to the crisis should be? Do you think there should be maybe another Brexit referendum?
No. Choose to leave. Leave, that's it.
What do you make about Boris Johnson and his attempts to leave? And what do you think the solution to the Brexit crisis should be?
Second vote, definitely.
Yeah.
Another referendum. Because we didn't even know what we were voting for last time. I think the first time round people were voting as if they were voting for a government instead of an idea.
And what do you think of Boris Johnson, Jem?
He's an idiot.
Jeremy Corbyn?
I like the idea of Jeremy Corbyn, but it just doesn't seem to be working.
There's no doing anything for us. We live in poverty here.
So if there was...
He's living in a mansion and this and that, and look at us. They're having to go and sign the brew, and they're trying to put on his own universal credit. How see people who's got like a problem, like an alcohol or drug problem, see if all that money goes into the bank, do you think you're going to wake up in the morning and you feel struggling, you go to the bank and see that money's there, do you think they're not going to spend some of that to square themselves up? So I'll tell you something, I would.
Boris Johnson's going to push for a general election today. Do you think there should be a general election?
No, I don't. I think the Brexit Party or Boris Johnson should get us out of the EU as soon as possible. So I think he's got a mandate for it, so why is he not doing it?
What do you think of his attempts so far? Do you blame Boris for not getting us out?
I blame Theresa May. Completely her. She surrendered everything to the EU. The deal was unvotable.
But see, just if there was a general election, who would you vote for? Tory, aye.
Or the Brexit Party.
Depending
who.
I don't think contemporary British politics is equipped with the language or the structures to get themselves out of the hole we've got into.
Yeah.
Don't see a general election being able to fix it.
So what might be the solution?
We just need a completely different approach to this. A more consensual form of politics, completely different language, an acknowledgement that nobody's got all the answers on this. I mean, scenes in the House of Commons last night were disgusting. Rees-Mogg, appalling. These people are behaving like idiots. Short-termist, selfish, self-centred. Had enough. Everybody's had enough.
If there were a general election, though, who would you vote for?
That's a really good question. Neither of the two main political parties. Definitely voted Labour all my life, but yeah, not anymore.
Is that you'd vote Brexit Party for general election?
But they don't believe democracy anymore. If you believe democracy, I don't agree with Brexit, but if you agree with democracy, you've got to pass it, or you're telling the people can.
Okay, thanks very much.
Like that, innit?
Thank you.
Voting for independence, we never voted accepted that.
Who do you think you'd vote for?
That's anybody that would just help us in Glasgow.
So that's what we heard on the streets of Govan today. I mean, what do you think, Liam? Were they voices or opinions that you recognise, that you've heard from other people you've spoken to about these issues?
Not really. Most of the people I'm speaking to don't have strong opinions either way on Brexit, as I said before. what I find interesting is that, you know, people are talking about, they're told we voted for Brexit, we've got to leave the European Union. Now, as someone who did vote for to leave the European Union myself, I think there's also a level of responsibility placed on all politicians of all parties and all constituencies where they voted leave or remain. If they've maybe seen evidence and briefing papers that show to them that people are going to suffer badly under potentially a no-deal Brexit, then I think they're well within their rights to do what they've done last night.
MPs have voted defeating Boris Johnson quite significantly.
328 for this motion, which allows MPs to take control of parliamentary business.
They will, in the next few days, try to change the law to rule out the possibility of ever leaving the European Union without a deal.
And also I think what's important is that people didn't vote last night, not all of them anyway, to stop Brexit. They voted to stop a no-deal Brexit. You know, no one's actually saying at this minute in time that there's no Brexit happening anymore. Some of us might suspect it might not happen anyway, but that's a whole other side issue. But I think we need to be kind of keep in touch with reality and not be too kind of hyperbolic when we're looking at these things.
It's worth saying at this point that we are filming this on a Wednesday afternoon, and by the time it goes out, probably on Friday morning, everything could have changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we speak, even.
Yeah. What I did pick up though from those interviews is that there's a significant element of like anti-political mood. Like, this is obviously a feature of our whole kind of period in history, and there is a worry, isn't there, that someone like because he looked pathetic last night, Boris Johnson. He looked ridiculous, but he could, or he probably hopes to, organise a sort of anti-politics election and say what Trump did.
Yeah.
Because he knows that there's anger and a mood of sort of disgust at politicians in general, in the Parliament and so on in general, and he might want to try and hold an election which is the people versus the Parliament, the people versus politics, that sort of thing. And presumably that could work for him. I mean, we live in an era where that is working for politicians.
Yeah, I think it could work. I think the problem you're seeing is that Boris Johnson's not very good at it. I mean, and the sense of the hype you get if you're an Etonian that's been told since you were 6 months old you're going to rule the country versus the reality bite pretty hard last night. He's not a good speaker, can't tell a joke, which is significant in that sort of environment when the cameras are on you. You fall apart under any form of pressure. Your bad judgment in terms of who you appoint, as you say, Rees-Mogg in the Parliament yesterday. Why on earth would you put him in your front line to defend it? It just shows a fundamental arrogance that you think I can do whatever I want. And the idea of that populist idea, which the right wing have used very effectively in some countries in the world, you need a leader that understands how to do that. Farage is better at it in that sense, because he's got the awareness, I think, which Johnson doesn't have, of what you need to do if you're going to pretend that you're representing ordinary people. Johnson's not got that ability, although that's what people want to believe about him.
Yeah. And it should be said as well, those people we spoke to, that might not be very representative of a Scottish picture. There are quite a lot of people we spoke to saying they would even support the Brexit Party and things like that, and they're not polling particularly well in Scotland. But it's very difficult, isn't it, to anticipate, if there were a general election, how much sway something like the Brexit Party can. I mean, I really believe that was quite a volatile political mood, and I suspect that is much more widespread. But when politics is this volatile, a lot depends on things like campaigns. I mean, Labour is basically now where they were at the start of the 2017 campaign, and of course they did much better than that in the end because they had a strong campaign. Could the same thing be true of something like the Brexit Party, do you think? It's hard to say, of course, because it's mainly an English phenomenon.
Yeah, it's quite an alarming prospect, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that for me, you're living in dangerous times when the anti-political movement is headed by people like Boris Johnson and potentially Nigel Farage. That's when we're looking at turkeys voting for Christmas, backing these two particular horses, or donkeys if you would rather put them that way. But I think one of the other things that Nick didn't pick up on is Boris Johnson isn't bad at telling jokes, he's particularly poor at telling the truth. And this is something, when we're sitting in this circumstance right now, and we've got Boris Johnson in his era of fake news running America, and Boris Johnson hopefully or potentially been returned, and I think he probably would, perhaps on the back of a coalition with the Brexit Party as Prime Minister. I think it's extraordinary times, and I really wonder where British politics goes from there, because some of the views for these people on the video there, one of the other things that kind of alarms me about that is these people seem to be angry with all the wrong people. You know, these people aren't angry because the politicians of today let them down. It's the politicians of yesteryear and people like Margaret Thatcher that set the ball rolling, and leaves us now in a circumstance where we do have working class people who probably will, in fact, who definitely will go and vote against their best interests in a general election. It's
interesting because there is that mood of some of the people we spoke to were simultaneously very angry against wealthy people who they felt had abandoned them, but that was sometimes mixed in with anger about immigrants or sort of foreigners in general.
It just sort of shows that kind of manipulation by the mainstream media that has made the focus be on these people, and that actually there's people that we spoke to that weren't included in the film who didn't have much to say apart from the fact that they were anti-immigrant, or they were anti-Nicola Sturgeon because she'd let them all in, you know, those kind of language. And that word of arrogance, when you're talking about Johnson, I mean, it's so kind of characteristic of the whole kind of conservative French bench. I mean, we saw Rees-Mogg lying around in the most kind of arrogant of poses. And they're getting away with it because people are backing them up, because the media is backing them up, and they're not, they're not pointing the finger and they're not shining the light where they should be shining it.
Although I think last night might be a turning point in some extent on that issue. I think that incompetence alongside arrogance can only last for so long. I mean, the real context, I mean, even if we think back to the IndyRef 2014, people don't maybe join the dots immediately, but it's the economic collapse that happened 10 years ago, 2007, 2008. We're living with the consequences of that in all sorts of weird ways, and blaming immigrant, and even before that, I suppose the decision that Blair and New Labour made to launch the war in Iraq caused mayhem around a third of the planet, which has caused immigration crisis, migrant crisis all over the world. So we're dealing with consequences that politicians have made, and how do we solve that problem? That's what people are struggling with. Independence, leaving the EU, staying in the EU, Corbyn, Johnson. I mean, people are all over the place in terms of what can we do. But anger is if nothing happens, anger fills that void.
When we go out and we speak to people, we do actually come across a lot of that element who are pro-independence, pro-leave. Now that can be harnessed for like a progressive movement that makes arguments about progress and about alleviating poverty and inequality and democratising society. But that anger can easily be led in a very, very different direction. I think sometimes there's a danger of imagining that society is sort of permanently defined by kind of left-wing and right-wing poles, or progressive and reactionary poles. There's a substantial area of society who are angry justly, but that can head in sort of different directions. And also that we're many countries. You know, this is why it's so difficult to make predictions about British politics. I have no idea what it looks like in some safe Tory seats where kind of liberal Toryism is a kind of thing that people vote for. I don't know what it looks like when those MPs got kicked out yesterday. I don't know how that lands in that constituency. Likewise, I'd love to be somewhere in the north of England right now and getting the temperature of what's going on there, because it's so far removed, even from where we are in Govan, in Glasgow, in another northern industrial city. So it's so hard to kind of predict these things, and let's not. Let's not predict.
Okay, well, on that note, I'd just like to thank our guests, to Liam and to Nick, for joining us, and thanks for watching. And as ever, we'd like to hear your thoughts on what we've been discussing, your comments and your opinions on what we might want to talk about in future shows. Probably something along the same. I imagine this is going to go on for a little while.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.